Public safety at the forefront of leaders' minds in Maryland. Team coverage of today's discussions on what is and is not being done to solve the youth crime crisis.
We've gotten to a point where folks are afraid of kids.
Unequivocally, the state is failing those children.
Frustration from leaders at the city and state level as we learn of another juvenile repeat offender. City schools employees accused of breaking the law. Fox 45 News Project Baltimore uncovers years worth of findings, including grade changing and physically abusing students. The fate of Marilyn Mosby in the hands of a federal jury. The arguments they'll have to consider. Car thefts are driving up insurance prices in Baltimore.
I was a victim with the insurance company and I was a victim with the city of Baltimore.
Why some may not get coverage at all.
Live from WBFF in Baltimore, this is Fox 45 News at 10.
Good evening, I'm Kai Jackson.
And I'm Mary Bubala. A battle over juvenile justice has been brewing all year across Maryland, and today lawmakers in Annapolis took another crack at tackling the crisis.
But that hearing left many with more questions than answers, saying the General Assembly isn't doing enough for crime victims or young offenders.
Count the number of times you heard stories about the victim, or where's the justice for the victim, or where's the accountability for the victim, and it wasn't very many times today.
It was stunning on a lot of levels, but it sent every message that you don't want to send to your kids.
Prosecutors, police, and parents have been sounding the alarm for months, saying the laws in place are enabling crime and not preventing it.
And tonight, Fox 45 News continues to push for some answers about what's being done to combat juvenile violence in Maryland.
Our team of reporters is looking into calls for changes to youth laws across the state. Keith Daniels is following concerns surrounding the Department of Juvenile Services.
We begin, though, with Maxine Stryker, who was in Annapolis for the 4-hour hearing this afternoon.
Lawmakers grilled those involved with juvenile services as well as police. But since this was not a special session and just a hearing when it comes to changing those laws on the books that many are concerned are escalating juvenile crime, the worry is no real change can come from this hearing today. Across Maryland, prosecutors.
We do need to expand the list of crimes that we can charge younger children with.
Police.
We're living in a time where, unfortunately, legislators, lawmakers, have decided that it's better to support the lawbreakers rather than those who are enforcing the law.
Even parents.
They need to stop making excuses. They need to start locking these kids up. They need to change the laws.
Are crying out for young people to be held accountable for crime.
Look what is going around.
Many are pointing the finger at 2 laws on the books as the root of the problem. The Juvenile Justice Reform Act, which limits those 13 and under to charges for crimes of violence, and the Child Interrogation Protection Act, which requires an attorney be consulted when a young person is taken into custody and their parents notified.
Ladies and gentlemen,
lawmakers returning to Annapolis Wednesday to discuss the crisis.
We've seen examples of prosecutors dropping not only juvenile crimes, dropping charges on juvenile crimes, but dropping charges not prosecuting violent crimes. Am I off base there? Because it seems that is a major contributor to, frankly, why we don't see a lot of these legitimate crimes come to the system.
Republican Delegate Robin Grammer of Baltimore County questioning President of the Maryland Fraternal Order of Police Clyde Boatwright, who says accountability is missing as juvenile crime is escalating.
So I don't think it's a thing of dropping the charges. It's what happens from the incident to the person going before a judge or a master. That's where we're seeing the problem. Once a person is taken into custody, a young person is taken into custody, and they go through that assessment with the Department of Juvenile Services, if they are released back to the community on electronic monitoring, they're now able to, if they choose to cut off the ankle bracelet or they just choose to not abide by the rules, they're now able to reoffend. And that's what we're seeing. The same young people are being released back to the community.
The Juvenile Justice Reform Council also testifying Wednesday, fielding many questions about juvenile repeat offenders.
Unequivocally, the state is failing those children. Do you see the juvenile system as a benefit, and where are the holes that are causing these children to repeat offend, sometimes multiple times on the same day?
I don't want kids getting arrested on back-to-back days, and we should be responding to them.
Car thefts, which have been soaring across the state, especially in Baltimore City, where car thefts by juveniles are up 166%, were also a concern addressed. Several times, a story uncovered by Fox 45 about an 11-year-old connected to more than a dozen car thefts across the region who never faced charges due to the law was brought up.
Do you agree that we should be looking at a change to the law to include auto thefts, or just keep things as they are?
I think the idea that we're going to reduce auto thefts by prosecuting 11-year-olds for when it happens, I don't see the link between the two things. And to me, that feels like a real stretch. And I think just generally, the idea that the only means for accountability is through prosecuting a kid, especially at that age, I think is where our imaginations need to be greater than that.
After several hours of discussion,
my real concern is that there continues to be, at least to a small degree, some downplaying of the nature of the problem.
Delegate Grammer left with some frustration.
They need to stop saying there is no problem. Second, we really need to start to get hooks into the Department of Juvenile Services where they're failing. You know, we are failing not only the victims, but we're failing the youth that are involved in the system.
Grammer says there simply wasn't enough talk about the victims in these cases. We asked why lawmakers have not addressed the problem sooner.
It's going to have to wait for session. We've had at least 10 years of growing juvenile issues. So we should have stepped back. We should have said we have problems. Let's address those first. If there are reform measures, let's think about those after the system stabilizes.
The committee will be back to meet for a third time to discuss the juvenile crime crisis in December. In Annapolis, Maxine Stryker, Fox 45 News.
Well, issues with home monitoring also brought up at today's public safety hearing, with many lawmakers and state FOP President Clyde Boatwright calling for more oversight.
In some cases, they are on the electronic monitoring, but as we talked about with Brooklyn Day and all of this, and I don't want to highlight that situation, but two people that were taken into custody both had ankle monitors on, and they both had guns, and they were shooting at each other or shooting at other people. So they were back in the community with an electronic monitoring system to reoffend. So where is the follow-up?
Now, the president of the Randallstown, Baltimore County NAACP says the Department of Juvenile Services needs to make sure changes are made to keep better track of children in their care and hold young offenders accountable. He sent a letter to DJS calling on the agency to act quickly.
So on one hand, we're having Marylanders being victimized. On the other hand, we're having children that are going to be graduating to more violent crime and be put in the system. This is very urgent and very serious, and I don't see that urgency.
Well, Fox 45 News reached out to DJS for a response to the letter. So far, we have not heard back.
During today's hearing, some pointed to policies from DJS enabling young people to take advantage of the rules in place. Just last week, 12 and 14-year-olds were arrested for assaulting a woman and trying to steal her car in Butchers Hill. They were released to their parents within 2 hours after police got a call from DJS. Former State Senator Jim Brochin says the department should be facing more questions about that call.
I sat on judicial proceedings for 14 of my 16 years in the Senate. We would have been howling right now, howling. I mean, we would have been like, this is unacceptable. We would have had a hearing and brought the Secretary of the Department of Juvenile Services in, okay? We all would have called for it and said, explain this, explain how he got let out, and explain the 14-year-old, and explain how this isn't going to happen again.
Brochin's comments backed up by parents in Baltimore who say they are struggling to control their children when the state isn't holding them accountable. Fox 45's Keith Daniels joins us live with their concerns as we're learning about another repeat juvenile offender who so far hasn't faced any consequences. Keith?
Well, Mary, the suspect in this latest case is 12 years old. He was allegedly involved in a case that's considered a violent crime. But tonight, again, we've learned so far he has faced no consequences, and it's unclear what services, if any, he's received from the Department of Juvenile Services. Tonight, another example of the recent string of troubling incidents involving juvenile offenders. Youth arrested by police for crimes, taken to the Baltimore City Juvenile Justice Center, then within hours in those cases, released by DJS with no charges, some of them sent home with their parents. At City Hall, city leaders, including Councilman Mark Conway, chairman of the Public Safety Committee.
How? My question is how?
Among those concerned about the matter.
It's especially troubling because these are young people. We've gotten to a point where folks are afraid of kids.
In this latest example, according to documents obtained by FOX45 News, police say a 12-year-old boy used a gun to rob a 31-year-old man of his bike. Investigators say it happened November 2nd. The boy arrested and charged with armed robbery, taken to DJS, but within hours released. According to the documents, within 48 hours of his release, the boy was locked up again, charged with 2 more armed robberies. Councilman Conway concerned over the seemingly lack of accountability in the case.
Sometimes, yes, it is accountability by way of jail time. Other times, it's accountability by way of resources and follow-up and follow-through and mentorship. But we got to make sure that those systems work. And when they're not working, we got to ask the question why.
Across the city, parents also expressing frustration over their children's criminal behavior and the juvenile justice system. This week, a mother who's protecting her identity spoke out about her 14-year-old son, allegedly caught on camera last week, accused of the assault and robbery of a woman in Butchers Hill.
I don't know, I don't know what to do with him. At this point, I'm trying to get the help that he needs. Gotta keep working on him.
Meanwhile, back at City Hall, another councilman on these troubling incidents involving youth.
It does a disservice to those young people when they are immediately released, because it sends the message to them that this is for play. We know that this is going to keep happening unless our young people are held to account.
Well, regarding the 12-year-old involved in the theft of robbery of the bike, according to those documents, the city state's attorney's office has received, or rather has not received, the case yet from DJS. We're live tonight. Keith Daniels, Fox 45 News.
Keith, thank you. Fox 45 News has also been hearing from top prosecutors across the state for months, saying that their hands are tied by the laws in place, including a measure that prevents children under 13 from facing serious charges.
Some of the problems is that even some of our felony charges, we're seeing an uptick in motor vehicle thefts. Those would not be considered a crime of violence. So anyone from 10 to 12 who gets involved in something like that doesn't come to us. We can't charge them. I mean, essentially, if they are found to have committed the crime, the police just have to drive them home. I mean, that's really all we can do.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I understand the legislators and the recent legislation that has passed. They don't want youth to grow up and have criminal convictions or to be part of the criminal justice system. But really what we're seeing is just delaying this delinquent behavior that turns into adult criminal behavior. And we need to get to these youth sooner.
Well, that brings us to our question of the day. Do you think the General Assembly has the best interests of voters or criminals in mind? So far, 94% of those who voted say criminals. You can make your voice heard by going to foxbaltimore.com/vote. Here in Baltimore City, the Safe Streets program is a cornerstone of the mayor's crime-fighting plan. And some Safe Streets workers are now under an FBI investigation after the Bel Air Edison location was raided. One of the employees is facing charges. Fox 45 News is demanding transparency about the program, and we have sent several questions to the mayor asking who are the employees, what oversight is in place to ensure employees don't commit more crimes. How do the nonprofits spend the money that's given from City Hall? Despite the problems, the city spending board approved $3.6 million for Safe Streets last week. Fox 45 News sent questions to Monzi asking about that money, including, does Monzi plan to allocate the funds to all 10 locations? With the Bel Air Edison location inactive, is Monzi going to withhold the funding until the federal investigation is complete? What does Interim Director Stephanie Mavronis say to the public regarding the perception of spending money on a program that's connected to a federal investigation?
We're also pressing City Council about the oversight of safe streets. The council can play a big role in figuring out what's going on, so we sent all members the following questions. Should city funding for safe streets be suspended until there is an audit or investigation of the program? Do you trust LifeBridge and Catholic Charities with your tax dollars? Given the history of criminal activity in safe streets and now the FBI raids, do you support halting safe streets activity until an independent investigation and audit of the program is done? So far, we haven't gotten any answers to our questions.
Coming up on Fox 45 News at 10 o'clock tonight, former City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby's fate is in the hands of a jury. They'll now begin deliberating tomorrow the arguments they have to consider. Also ahead at 10 o'clock tonight, for the thousands of car theft victims in Baltimore, having their cars stolen is the start of a long and costly process. The impact it could have on your car insurance.
A much warmer day with potential near record warmth for our Thursday. Temperatures well into the 70s, but cooler air ahead. I'm going to let you know when it gets here on my Weather Authority forecast.
Grade changing, ghost students, and even physical abuse. Project Baltimore is investigating allegations of laws broken inside Baltimore City Public Schools for years. Coming up, a look at what taxpayer dollars are funding.
Employees accused of grade changing, physically abusing children, and collecting a paycheck for work that was never done.
Over the past few years, those are just a few of the allegations Baltimore City Schools has investigated concerning its own employees. And as Project Baltimore's Chris Papps reports, that's just the start.
$1.6 billion. That is how much money Baltimore City Schools will get from taxpayers this year. And we believe you, the taxpaying public, deserves to know what the district and its employees are doing with your money. And part of that is who Baltimore City Schools investigates internally and why. December 2019. A Baltimore City Schools employee is found to have choked an 8th grade student to the point where that student couldn't breathe. 2 years later, in December 2021, another City Schools employee is accused and found guilty of kicking a nonverbal student and then aggressively dragging them 3 or 4 times. These are just 2 findings from recent Baltimore City Schools internal investigations reviewed by Project Baltimore. From a public records request, we obtained 4 years worth of internal investigations conducted by North Avenue into its own employees. Each report with confirmed findings, 79 in total. Over the next few months, we will show you what's in these reports, which document a wide range of issues plaguing Baltimore City schools. Issues like grade changing. In January 2019, City Schools investigator confirmed allegations of grade changing for student athletes to make them eligible to play sports. Much of this report is redacted. We can't see which schools were involved or how many students, but we can see the report found grades were changed from failing to passing by 2 school employees with no valid explanation. More than 1 year later, in June 2020, a teacher was found to have used profanity while holding class. The teacher, according to the report, said during his online lesson, "I'm not doing this. These kids don't know." In all of those internal investigations, the employee who was investigated no longer works for Baltimore City Schools, including the employee from this investigation. This report is interesting because it raises very serious questions over who City Schools chooses to investigate and who it chooses not to investigate. This report was filed in July 2019. It explains how a district employee was collecting a paycheck for work that was not done. At one point, according to this report, the employee used a personal cell phone to initiate a Facebook Live video during her assigned City Schools work hours. According to North Avenue, the employee received more than $2,100 for about 111 hours of work, but was not actually working. If that sounds familiar, it should. Project Baltimore, back in January, first broke the story that City Schools police detective and state champion football coach Lawrence Smith was submitting forms for overtime when it appears he was not actually working. Here, Smith in a Facebook Live video can be seen driving a boat on the Chesapeake Bay at the exact time his overtime form says he was working.
You want to say something to your players, Coach?
Smith was later arrested by the FBI, in part for allegations of fraudulently obtaining more than $215,000 in overtime. But City Schools never launched an internal investigation into Smith. In fact, in April, after this Fox 45 report aired, City Schools promoted Smith to corporal. Meanwhile, this person was treated very differently. North Avenue launched an investigation into this employee who no longer works for the district. I'm Chris Pabst, and this is Project Baltimore.
Some big news from Maryland, why the FBI is moving its headquarters here. The new location it will call home.
And the roller coaster pattern continues. Take a look. The planner for tomorrow, we're back up again. We only had 63 today. Tomorrow, 76, just 2 degrees off of records. Could see some patchy clouds. There could even be a shower or sprinkle during the afternoon as a cold front rolls through. And look at what that does heading through Friday and Saturday. Showery 50s on Friday, only shy of 60 on Saturday for Veterans Day. I'm going to let you know how things look for the Ravens game on Sunday. What's up in my Weather Authority forecast?
And that roller coaster, as Jonathan said, will have us up at the top of the hill tomorrow before we start heading down and the bottom falls out. This is a live look at Towson as we head to the break. The Avalon building right there, apartment building right at the Towson Circle. Back in a moment.
The FBI's new headquarters are coming to Maryland. It is coming to Maryland, making the move away from their longtime base in D.C. The new complex will be near the Greenbelt Metro Station in Prince George's County. About 40% of FBI employees already live in Maryland. Congress made the decision to move because the current FBI building is falling apart in downtown Washington, D.C. The relocation has a projected cost of about $200 million.
Family members have identified the man shot and killed by police in southwest Baltimore Tuesday afternoon as Hunter Jessup. The family shared this picture of Jessup with Fox 45 News. He was shot after police say he pointed a gun at officers during a chase. Now, Commissioner Richard Worley says he was told multiple times to drop the weapon. The Attorney General's office is investigating the shooting.
Thousands of people in Baltimore City have had their cars stolen. Now they're dealing with higher insurance premiums. How car thefts could impact your insurance even if your car isn't stolen.
Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib censured by her colleagues on Capitol Hill. I'm Kayla Gaskins, and coming up, why not everyone agrees.
We're following three big stories at 10:30. Congress voted to censure Democrat Rashida Tlaib after her comments on the Israel-Hamas war. The fallout from the vote, as Tlaib says, Republicans are twisting her words.
The Baltimore City Council addresses car thefts, and that's not the only issue on drivers' minds. How keeping your car in Baltimore could be hurting your wallet.
And the fate of Marilyn Mosby's perjury trial now in the hands of a federal jury as the defense rested today. Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost was in court all day.
And she takes us through the closing arguments from both sides.
After 3 days of witness testimony, cross-examination, and closing arguments, this case is now in the hands of the jury. Marilyn Mosby choosing not to take the stand and testify, all while whether her travel businesses really suffered a financial loss remains at the heart of this trial.
Good morning, Ms. Mosby.
Good morning.
Are you planning to testify today?
Walking into day 3 of her federal perjury trial, Marilyn Mosby had yet decided whether she would take the stand herself. After a back and forth, ultimately, she elected not to testify. In closing arguments, prosecutors saying to the jury, the evidence proves Marilyn Mosby believed that telling the truth didn't matter. Going through Mosby's financial records, prosecutors say her trips that she claimed were related to her business, Mahogany Elite, were actually personal trips. And because Mosby's travel business that she described publicly was designed to offer chances for underserved black families to travel, had no clients or expenses, prosecutors argue the businesses were not operational. Use your common sense. Does that sound like an open and operating business? Prosecutors asked the jury. By contrast, Mosby's defense team argues she had plans to run a women's retreat business, telling the jury, you know the world stopped when the pandemic hit. For Ms. Mosby, the pandemic meant the crashing of her dream. Then her team says she shifted to a family travel business as a long-term venture during the pandemic. But based on advice from her spokesperson at the time, Zaya Richardson, Mosby publicly said her businesses would not be operational while she was in office.
Ultimately, the choice falls on her.
Defense attorney Kurt Nachman isn't affiliated with this case, but says recordings like this.
Is there any way for me to withdraw the funds?
Of Mosby asking for the money.
I need to figure out a way that I can get the money.
Along with her previous comments, will likely be factors for the jury.
The CARES Act was really a rushed bill that was put through Congress, and this is definitely going to be an issue. It's been raised in other cases, other federal cases and prosecutions throughout the country. It's certainly going to get traction with this jury.
Making one final pitch, Mosby's defense team claiming she believed her future losses from not having her travel businesses running during the pandemic meant Mosby qualified to withdraw money from her retirement account, saying the evidence is that Marilyn Mosby got it right. But even if she didn't, if you think she got it wrong, it's not a crime, adding Marilyn Mosby is innocent. But the government getting the last word, saying at the end of the day, truth matters. And the truth is Marilyn Mosby is guilty of perjury. The jury getting the case just after 4:30 Wednesday afternoon and leaving without starting deliberations. Mosby waving to the press on her way out of the courthouse. The jury is expected to return Thursday morning to begin deliberations. If convicted, Marilyn Mosby faces up to 5 years in prison for each perjury count. We're outside the federal courthouse in Greenbelt. Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
Fox 45 News will be at court in Greenbelt in the coming days as we await a verdict. Be sure to download the Fox 45 News app and turn on notifications to get breaking developments even when we aren't on the air.
Baltimore police giving their quarterly crime update in front of the city council this afternoon. The city has seen a decline in homicides and non-fatal shootings this year. Homicides are down 21% and non-fatal shootings down 7%. But police are concerned about a rise in auto theft, seeing more than 9,500 so far this year. That is a 200% increase from this time last year.
Earlier this afternoon, the city council held a hearing to address the car theft crisis in the city. Police say more than 38% of those arrested are juveniles, many of them arrested multiple times for the same crime. But only 2/3 of those suspects are reported to the Department of Juvenile Services. Only 5% end up serving time in a DJS facility. The rest, we understand, receive probation and have the charges pending or have their charges dismissed. The city council was critical of those numbers, saying change is impossible without consequences.
Baltimore City, we are failing our young people. And if we're not getting the job right, and they see that we're acting a fool, and we're not taking them seriously, they're not going to take us seriously.
We are having a crisis around young people that are committing very violent crimes, being arrested, and then not being fully held accountable.
Concerned Baltimore residents also testified, saying they fear for their safety among a spike in car thefts.
My community has been hit so hard from 2020 up until now with teenagers going crazy, and no one has done anything about them.
My biggest fear is being carjacked with my children in the car. And what am I supposed to do when 6 to 8 youth surround my car? What am I supposed to do? I can't fight back. What if they shoot me? What if they hurt me? What are my children supposed to do? We need to stop this and hold these kids accountable.
Well, amid those fears over stolen cars in the city, Baltimore residents also grappling with a surge in their insurance rates. Fox 45's Vincent Hill joins us live with a look at the cost being passed down to victims. Vincent?
Yeah, let's look at some of these numbers. Over 9,000 cars stolen in Baltimore this year. Only 60% recovered. That other 40% costing victims $200 million.
At the city's impound lot on Pulaski Highway.
As of last week, we were experiencing a 227% increase in auto thefts.
Mayor Brandon Scott pointing to a troubling and costly trend for Baltimore City.
Prior to this change, owners of stolen vehicles had to pay $130 to $140 to cover towing costs. Under this new policy, the city has assumed the cost of the nearly $250,000 annually that is historically associated with towing fees and recovering stolen vehicles.
While that fee may be waived for recovered vehicles,
60%.
Only 60% of the over 9,000 stolen have been recovered. If the other 40% need to be replaced, the cost.
Let's take an average vehicle cost of $20,000, right? That's $200 million worth of new vehicles purchased in Baltimore City.
That's millions of dollars passed on to the victim. According to Hayward Howard, Senior Vice President of Murray, Dunley and Parr Insurance.
We're seeing average increases probably somewhere in the 10 to 12% range. And there's no expectation based on what we're being told that the increases in premium are going to subside.
It's a concern Fox 45 has heard from several victims of car theft.
I was a victim once with my car being stolen. I was a victim with the insurance company.
It's frustrating, I have to go through all this other extra financial situations with this, so it's really frustrating.
It's not so much my car was stolen, it was all the other stuff.
And it's not just increased premiums. Some insurance companies deciding not to underwrite a policy in Baltimore altogether.
As insurers decide to leave certain jurisdictions altogether, you're creating an environment that is lacking competition.
And a lack of competition, raising prices for those looking to be insured.
Meanwhile, insurance companies like State Farm and Progressive have already stopped insuring Hyundais and Kias in most major cities because of the thefts. In Baltimore, Vincent Hill, Fox 45 News.
Now the war between Israel and Hamas. It's been about a month since Hamas attacked Israel, killing 1,400 Israelis. And this is what we know about the conflict. Israel is in the early stages of destroying the vast tunnel network under the Gaza Strip. At least 130 tunnel entrances have been destroyed. Israeli military leaders claim forces are now surrendering in the heart of Gaza City. The G7 nations have joined in the calls for a humanitarian pause in the war to get aid in and people out. The group also condemned the October 7th attack on Israel. This is the UN Secretary General says the laws of war are being violated all around.
Since the war began, we've been seeing growing anti-Israeli sentiment both here in America and across the world. Over the weekend, thousands of Iranians gathered to mark the 1979 takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Demonstrators chanted "Death to Israel" while condemning Washington's support of the country in the war. Well, here in the United States, we have seen anti-Israel sentiments growing on college campuses. Senator Mitt Romney signed an open letter from Harvard alumni to university leaders slamming what they called a rise in anti-Semitism on campus. Now, the New York Post is reporting a D.C. company, Arabella Advisors, has given more than $10 million to anti-Israeli causes since 2018. The company has been accused of being a left-wing dark money network. And today, word Hamas may want to make this conflict a permanent war. In an interview with the New York Times, one Hamas leader said, quote, "I hope that the state of war with Israel will become permanent on all the borders and that the Arab world will stand with us."
That brings us to our question of the day. It brings us to the latest action, from the House. Members passed a bipartisan resolution censuring Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib over comments she made about the Israel-Hamas war. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins has the story.
It's one of the more serious forms of punishment for lawmakers. The House voting to censure Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. 22 members of Tlaib's own party voting